"You'll die before he finds out," the fiancé whispered while choking the maid. Then the billionaire saw everything. She pressed her hand against the maid's throat in the dark hallway, her voice shaking with something colder than anger. "You'll die before he finds out," she whispered, her fingers tightening with every word. The maid's eyes went wide, tears sliding down her face, her lips moving without sound. Neither of them heard the soft click of the study door. Neither of them saw him standing there, phone still in his hand, his whole world about to shatter in the next 10 seconds. What he saw that night would change 3 lives forever, and none of them would ever be the same again. Welcome back, everyone, to the channel where we bring you real, raw, emotional stories that stay with you long after they end. Before we start tonight's story, tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever shared. It's about love, betrayal, courage, and the kind of truth that can't stay hidden forever. Stay until the end, because what happens in this story might just change how you see the people closest to you. Let's begin. Maria Santos had been working as a housekeeper for the Cole family for almost 2 years, and in that time, she had learned one important rule about wealthy households. The walls always had ears, but nobody ever seemed to listen to the people who cleaned them. She was 28 years old, quiet, hardworking, and carried herself with a kind of dignity that made people forget she was just the maid. She had come from a small town 3 hours outside the city, and every dollar she earned went toward her mother's medical bills and her little brother's school fees. She never complained. She never asked for more than what was fair. She simply worked, kept her head down, and dreamed of one day going back to school to become a nurse, the way she had always wanted to before life forced her to grow up too fast. The Cole mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city, all glass and marble and quiet elegance, the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than a real family's life. Ethan Cole, the man who owned it, was 32 years old and one of the most successful businessmen in the country. He had built his real estate empire from nothing after his father's company nearly collapsed, and by the time he was 30, his name was already known in every major city skyline. But money hadn't made him cold. If anything, it had made him more careful about who he let close to him. He had learned the hard way that people rarely wanted him for who he was. They wanted what he had. That was part of why, when he met Vanessa Reed at a charity gala 2 years earlier, he had fallen so quickly and so completely. She was 29, stunning in the effortless way that made people stop and stare, and she had a way of making him feel like the only person in the room. She laughed at his jokes, listened to his worries about the company, and never once seemed to care about the size of his bank account. Or so he believed. Within a year, he had proposed. Within 2, the wedding was only a few months away, and the entire city was already talking about what promised to be the social event of the year. But Maria noticed things that Ethan didn't. She noticed the way Vanessa's smile would vanish the moment Ethan left the room, replaced by something sharper, colder, more calculating. She noticed the phone calls Vanessa took in the garden late at night, her voice dropping to a hush the second footsteps approached. She noticed the way Vanessa spoke to the staff, sweet and charming when Ethan was watching, dismissive and cruel the second he wasn't. Maria had learned to stay quiet. It wasn't her place to say anything. She needed this job. Her family needed this job. But quiet didn't mean blind, and lately, what Maria was seeing made her stomach twist with a worry she couldn't explain. It started 3 weeks before the wedding, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Maria had been asked to organize the guest room closet, moving boxes that had been sitting untouched since Vanessa first moved in. Tucked behind a stack of old shoeboxes, wrapped in a plastic bag like something meant to be forgotten, was a small wooden box. Maria almost didn't open it. She almost put it back exactly where she found it and pretended she'd never seen it at all. But something about the way it was hidden, not stored, but buried, made her hesitate. Inside was a folded document, yellowed slightly at the edges, and a photograph of Vanessa standing beside a man Maria had never seen before, both of them dressed in wedding clothes, both of them smiling in front of a small courthouse. Maria's hands went cold as she read the paper. It was a marriage certificate. Vanessa Reed, soon to marry Ethan Cole, was already married. to a man named Daniel Reyes. The date on the certificate was only 4 years old, which meant, unless something had changed, Vanessa Reed was not free to marry anyone at all. Maria sat on the floor of that closet for a long time, her heart pounding, unsure of what to do with what she now knew. Should she tell Mr. Cole? Would he even believe her, a maid, over the woman he loved? Or would Vanessa simply deny it, twist the story, and have Maria fired? Or worse, before the truth ever reached him? She thought of her mother's medical bills. She thought of her brother's tuition. She thought of everything she stood to lose. And for the first time since she started working at the Cole mansion, Maria felt truly afraid. What would you do if you found out a secret that could destroy someone's life, and possibly your own along with it? Tell us in the comments below. Maria put the box back exactly where she found it, her hands trembling, and told herself she needed time to think. She didn't know yet that Vanessa had already noticed the closet had been touched. She didn't know that somewhere in that house, a woman with everything to lose was about to become far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The days that followed felt different to Maria, heavier somehow, like the air in the house had changed without anyone saying a word. She told herself she was imagining it, that fear was making her see things that weren't there. But she wasn't imagining the way Vanessa's eyes lingered on her a beat too long during breakfast service, or the way Vanessa asked, almost too casually, whether Maria had been going through any of the closets lately. Maria had smiled, said no, and gone back to polishing the silverware with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. Ethan, meanwhile, was dealing with problems of his own, though none of them involved the woman he was about to marry, at least not yet. His company was in the middle of a major acquisition, and for weeks he had barely slept, splitting his time between board meetings and video calls with investors overseas. He loved Vanessa. He trusted her completely. But lately, something small and quiet had been nagging at the back of his mind, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It wasn't suspicion, not exactly. It was more like the sense you get when a picture on the wall is hanging slightly crooked and you can't relax until you fix it, even if you can't say why it bothers you so much. It had started with little things. A missed call from a number he didn't recognize, which Vanessa quickly explained away as a wrong number. A weekend trip she took to visit an old friend that left her unusually quiet and distant when she returned. A moment, just days ago, when he'd walked into the bedroom to find her hurriedly closing her laptop, her smile arriving a half-second too late to feel natural. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. He had built an empire by staying calm under pressure and trusting his instincts only when the evidence supported them. But that instinct, the same one that had saved his company more than once, was quietly telling him that something in his life didn't add up. He hired a private investigator the following week, not because he wanted to catch Vanessa doing anything wrong, he told himself, but because he needed peace of mind before he said his vows in front of 300 guests and promised his entire life to her. He didn't tell anyone, not even his closest friends. He simply handed the investigator a folder with Vanessa's full name, her stated background, and asked for a full report within 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Vanessa's world was quietly falling apart in ways Ethan couldn't see. Daniel Reyes, the man whose name was still legally tied to hers, had resurfaced 3 months earlier after nearly 4 years of silence, deep in debt and desperate for money. He had found her through a mutual friend on social media, seen the pictures of her engagement to one of the wealthiest men in the country, and realized immediately that he was holding something far more valuable than he'd ever imagined, a secret that could destroy her entire future if it ever came to light. He had been calling her, threatening to show up at the wedding itself if she didn't pay him what he wanted. Vanessa had already given him nearly $60,000 from her own savings, money she had quietly pulled from accounts Ethan didn't monitor closely, hoping it would be enough to make him disappear again. It wasn't. Daniel wanted more, and every week his messages grew colder, more insistent, more dangerous. Vanessa had married Daniel when she was 25, young and in love with a man who promised her the world and delivered nothing but broken promises and mounting debt. She had left him 2 years later, moving to a different city, changing her number, trying to start over, but she had never actually filed for divorce. At the time, it hadn't seemed urgent. She never imagined she would fall in love again, let alone with a man like Ethan Cole. By the time she realized the truth mattered, it felt too late, too complicated, too dangerous to bring up. So she had buried it, the same way she buried that box in the closet, and hoped it would simply stay hidden forever. Now, with the wedding closing in and Daniel's threats growing louder, Vanessa felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff that was slowly crumbling beneath her feet. And when she noticed that someone had been in that closet, someone who might have found the one thing capable of ending everything she had worked so hard to build, her fear turned into something far more dangerous. It turned into desperation. And desperate people, she was about to prove, are capable of things they never believed themselves capable of. Maria felt the shift in Vanessa almost immediately. The polite, distant coldness Vanessa usually reserved for the staff had sharpened into something else entirely, a watchfulness that followed Maria from room to room. Twice that week, Maria turned around to find Vanessa standing in a doorway, simply watching her, saying nothing, her expression unreadable. Maria began to dread going to work, though she couldn't have explained exactly why, only that some deep, old instinct told her she was no longer just an employee in that house. She was a witness. And witnesses, she realized with a chill, were not always safe. She thought about quitting. She even drafted a resignation letter one night, sitting at her small kitchen table with her mother asleep in the next room. But she tore it up before morning. She needed the paycheck too badly, and besides, some stubborn part of her refused to let fear chase her away from a life she had worked so hard to build. She told herself she would simply stay quiet, do her job, and let whatever was going to happen without her involvement. She had no idea that in less than 2 weeks, she would be the one standing at the center of it all, fighting for her own life in a dark hallway while the man of the house watched from the shadows, frozen by the horror of what he was seeing. What secrets do you think Vanessa is still hiding? Let us know what you think happens next. The wedding was now just 10 days away, and the Cole mansion had transformed into something between a 5-star hotel and a battlefield of preparations. Florists arrived every morning with fresh deliveries. Caterers tested menus in the kitchen. Wedding planners moved through the halls with clipboards and walkie-talkies, speaking in urgent, hushed tones about seating charts and lighting arrangements. Through all of it, Maria kept working, kept smiling politely at guests who barely noticed her, kept telling herself that soon this would all be over and life would return to its normal, quiet rhythm. She was wrong. The private investigator Ethan hired called him on a Thursday evening, asking to meet in person rather than discuss the findings over the phone. Always a bad sign, Ethan knew from experience. He met the man at a small cafe 2 blocks from his office. Ordering coffee neither of them touched. The investigator slid a folder across the table and said simply, "You need to see this before you sign anything." Inside was everything. Daniel Reyes's name. The marriage certificate, obtained through public records. Bank statements showing large, unexplained withdrawals from Vanessa's personal accounts over the past 3 months. And perhaps most damning of all, phone records showing dozens of calls and text messages exchanged between Vanessa and a number registered to Daniel Reyes, extending as recently as 2 days earlier. Ethan sat in that cafe for nearly an hour after the investigator left, staring at the folder without opening it again, his coffee going cold in front of him. He felt something inside his chest crack quietly, the particular kind of pain that comes not from anger but from grief. The death of a version of his life he had already started building in his mind. The wedding, the honeymoon, the children they had talked about having someday. All of it built on a foundation that, it turned out, had never really been solid at all. He didn't confront her immediately. Some part of him, the careful businessman who never made a major decision without complete information, wanted to understand the full picture first. He wanted to know why. He wanted, desperately and perhaps foolishly, to believe there was some explanation that would make this all make sense, some version of the truth where the woman he loved hadn't simply been lying to him for 2 years. He decided to watch, quietly, carefully, the way he would study a business deal that had started to smell wrong. He told no one, not even his own family, and for the next several days he moved through his normal routine with Vanessa as if nothing had changed, all while his heart quietly broke a little more with every fake smile she gave him. Vanessa, unaware that Ethan now knew almost everything, was drowning in a crisis of her own. Daniel had called again that week, angrier than before, demanding one final payment of $200,000 or he would walk into the wedding himself and announce to every guest, every reporter, and every camera that the bride was already legally married to someone else. Vanessa didn't have that kind of money without Ethan noticing, and asking him for it directly was impossible without raising exactly the questions she couldn't afford to answer. That same week, she became convinced, with a paranoia that had been steadily building for days, that Maria knew about the marriage certificate. She had noticed the box in the closet had been moved, just slightly, the plastic bag folded differently than she remembered leaving it. She told herself it might be nothing. But nothing about her life right now felt safe enough to leave to chance, and every time she looked at Maria's calm, quiet face, she felt a rising, irrational certainty that the maid was sitting on the one secret capable of destroying everything. On the Tuesday night before the wedding, exactly 1 week away, Ethan told Vanessa he had a late business call and would be working in his study until midnight. It wasn't entirely a lie. He did have calls to make. But he also wanted, more than anything, to be alone with his thoughts, to figure out how he was going to say what needed to be said without letting his voice break in front of her. What he didn't know was that same night, in a quiet hallway near the east wing of the house, Vanessa was about to make the worst decision of her life, and he was about to witness every second of it. Maria had stayed late that evening finishing last-minute preparations for rehearsal dinner 2 days out, carrying a stack of freshly pressed linens toward the hallway closet when Vanessa stepped out from the shadows near the staircase, blocking her path. Her face, usually so composed, looked different in the dim light, tighter, paler, her eyes carrying something Maria had never seen in them before. "We need to talk," Vanessa said quietly, "about what you found in my closet." Maria's blood went cold. She opened her mouth to deny it, to say she didn't know what Vanessa meant, but the words wouldn't come. Her silence was answer enough. What would you do if you were standing in Maria's shoes at that exact moment? Tell us honestly in the comments. Vanessa took a slow step closer, her voice dropping into something barely above a whisper, something that didn't sound like her at all. "You don't understand what you've done," she said. "You don't understand what's at stake here." And in that hallway, with the linen still clutched against Maria's chest and nowhere left to run, the truth of just how far Vanessa was willing to go was about to reveal itself in the most terrifying way imaginable. Maria backed away instinctively, but the hallway was narrow, and Vanessa moved faster than she expected, closing the distance in 2 quick steps. "Please," Maria said, her voice trembling, the linen slipping from her arms and falling to the floor between them. "I didn't tell anyone. I swear I didn't tell anyone." "You're lying," Vanessa hissed, and something in her had changed completely now, the elegant, composed fiancée replaced by someone raw and unraveling, months of fear and desperation finally breaking loose all at once. "Do you have any idea what happens to me if this gets out? Do you have any idea what I've already lost trying to keep this together?" Maria tried to explain, tried to tell her that she hadn't said a word to Ethan or anyone else, that she had simply put the box back and tried to forget what she'd seen. But Vanessa wasn't listening anymore. Whatever thin thread of control she had been holding onto for the past 3 months finally snapped, and before Maria could react, Vanessa's hand shot forward and closed around her throat, pushing her back against the wall with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond her slender frame. "You'll die before he finds out," Vanessa whispered, her fingers tightening, her face inches from Maria's, tears streaming down her own cheeks even as she spoke the words. It wasn't a calculated threat. It was the sound of a woman completely consumed by panic, no longer thinking clearly about consequences, only about survival. Maria's hands flew up, clawing weakly at Vanessa's wrist, her vision beginning to blur at the edges, her lungs burning for air that wouldn't come. Down the hallway, the study door had been left slightly open, and Ethan, who had finished his last call only minutes earlier, stepped out to get a glass of water before heading up to bed. He heard something, a muffled sound, A gasp, something that didn't belong in the quiet of his own house at 11 at night. He followed it instinctively, the way he might follow an unusual noise in an empty building, alert but not yet afraid. What he saw when he turned the corner stopped his heart cold. Vanessa, the woman he had planned to marry in 7 days, had another woman pinned against the wall, her hand wrapped around her throat, her voice hissing words that no loving, gentle person he thought he knew could ever say. For a fraction of a second, Ethan's mind refused to process what his eyes were telling him. Then instinct took over. Vanessa. His voice tore through the hallway like a whip, and Vanessa's had snapped toward him, her hand releasing Maria's throat so suddenly that Maria crumpled to the floor, coughing violently, gasping for air, her whole body shaking. Vanessa stood frozen, her hand still raised, her face a mask of horror as the reality of being seen crashed over her. Ethan, she started, but there was nothing she could say that would undo what he had just witnessed with his own eyes. He didn't wait for an explanation. He crossed the hallway in 3 long strides and knelt beside Maria, checking that she was breathing, his hands gentle despite the fury boiling beneath his calm exterior. "Are you okay? Maria, look at me. Are you okay?" Maria could only nod weakly between coughs, tears streaming down her face, relief and terror tangled together inside her. Ethan rose to his full height and turned to face Vanessa, and the look on his face was something she had never seen before. Not anger exactly, though there was plenty of that, but something deeper and colder. Disgust. Betrayal. The final collapse of every illusion he had let himself believe for 2 years. "I already know," he said quietly, and Vanessa's face went white. "I know about Daniel Reyes. I know about the marriage certificate. I know about the money you've been pulling from your accounts. I've known for days." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out, the ground beneath her feet finally, completely giving way. "I was trying to figure out how to give you the chance to tell me the truth yourself," Ethan continued, his voice shaking now, the calm control finally cracking under the weight of everything he was feeling. "I wanted to believe there was some explanation. I wanted to believe I hadn't spent 2 years loving someone who never actually existed." He looked down at Maria, still trembling on the floor, red marks already forming on her throat, and something in his expression shifted from heartbreak to protective fury. "And instead I find you trying to kill an innocent woman to protect a lie. If you were Ethan in this moment, discovering this level of betrayal all at once, how do you think you would react? Let us know in the comments below." Vanessa fell to her knees in the hallway, sobbing, the last of her composure completely gone. "Please," she begged, "please let me explain. It's not what it looks like. I was scared, I panicked, I never meant to hurt her. But Ethan was no longer listening. He had already pulled out his phone, his hands steady despite everything, and dialed for an ambulance for Maria and, moments later, the police. Whatever was about to happen next, one thing had become absolutely clear to everyone standing in that hallway. Nothing in that house would ever be the same again. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and hushed, urgent voices. Paramedics examined Maria in the mansion's grand foyer, checking her throat, her breathing, asking gentle questions while she sat wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders. She was shaken but stable, the paramedics assured Ethan, though they recommended she go to the hospital overnight for observation, just to be safe. Ethan insisted on paying for everything and rode with her in the ambulance himself, refusing to leave her side, his mind still reeling from everything he had witnessed in the past hour. Vanessa was taken into a separate room by the responding officers, where she sat, pale and trembling, finally telling the truth in pieces, her voice hollow with exhaustion and shame. She admitted to the marriage. She admitted to hiding it, to the money she had been paying Daniel Reyes, to the panic that had consumed her when she believed Maria had discovered her secret. She insisted, through tears, that she never meant to actually hurt anyone, that she had simply lost control in a moment of terror she still couldn't fully explain even to herself. Whether that would matter legally was no longer up to her. Assault charges were filed that same night, and given the circumstances, a documented case of bigamy layered on top of physical harm to another person, It was clear her life was about to change in ways far beyond the collapse of her engagement. At the hospital, Maria lay in a quiet room, and in her arm, her throat sore but her breathing steady, the immediate danger behind her even as the shock of what had happened still sat heavy in her chest. Ethan sat in the chair beside her bed long into the night, saying very little at first, simply making sure she had water, an extra blanket, anything she needed. Finally, somewhere around 2 a.m, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry this happened in my house, under my roof, because of something I should have caught sooner." Maria shook her head weakly. "You didn't do this," she said, her voice raspy but steady.
"She did."
"You have nothing to apologize for." But Ethan couldn't shake the guilt sitting heavy in his chest. He thought about all the times over the past 2 years he had walked past Maria in the hallway without really seeing her, the way wealth sometimes makes people invisible to each other even when they share the same roof every single day. He thought about how she had been carrying this secret, this fear, entirely alone, with no one to turn to and everything to lose if she spoke up. "You could have told me," he said gently, "about the marriage certificate. I would have believed you." Maria was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Mr. Cole, I'm a maid in your house. You were about to marry her in a week. Who do you think most people would have believed?" The honesty in her words landed heavier than any accusation could have, and Ethan sat with the weight of it, understanding for the first time just how differently the world had treated the two women who had both, in their own ways, been caught in Vanessa's web of secrets. Over the following days, as the police investigation moved forward and the wedding was formally, publicly canceled, a scandal the tabloids devoured with predictable hunger, Ethan made sure Maria's medical bills were completely covered, insisting on it despite her protests. He gave her paid leave for as long as she needed to recover, both physically and emotionally, and quietly began looking into nursing programs in the city, remembering something she had once mentioned in passing about wanting to become a nurse someday, back before life had made that dream feel impossible. Vanessa, meanwhile, faced the full weight of what she had done. Daniel Reyes was eventually located and questioned as well, and it became clear that he had been extorting her for months, though that fact did little to soften the consequences of her own actions. The marriage to Ethan was, of course, never going to happen now, and beyond the personal devastation of losing the life she had built, she faced formal charges for assault, an ordeal that would follow her for years to come. In her lowest moment, sitting in a small holding room waiting for her lawyer, Vanessa finally understood something that came far too late to save her. The lies she had told to protect the life she wanted had ended up destroying it far more completely than the truth ever could have. What do you think should happen to Vanessa now that everything has come out into the open? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments. 3 weeks later, Maria returned to work at the Cole mansion, though everything about her position there had quietly changed. Ethan had promoted her to head of household staff, with a salary that finally made her mother's medical bills and her brother's tuition feel manageable rather than crushing. But more than that, something had shifted in the way he treated her. Not as staff to be managed, but as a person whose courage and honesty had, in the end, saved him from a life built on a lie. Slowly, carefully, something neither of them expected began to grow between them, not out of drama or desperation, but out of genuine respect, gratitude, and the quiet kind of connection that forms when two people have been through something real together. 6 months passed before Maria felt like herself again, though in many ways, she realized, she had become someone even stronger than before. The bruises on her neck had long since healed, but the experience had left its mark in quieter ways, a heightened caution in dark hallways, a habit of checking twice before trusting someone new. Therapy had helped, something Ethan had insisted on paying for without making her feel like it was charity, simply telling her that healing mattered and she deserved every support available to get there. Ethan, for his part, had spent those same months rebuilding his own sense of trust, not just in others, but in his own judgment. The wedding scandal had made headlines for weeks, and he'd endured plenty of uncomfortable conversations with business partners and reporters alike. But he found, surprisingly, that he didn't mourn the loss of Vanessa nearly as much as he mourned the 2 years he had spent building a future with someone who never really existed. What he felt now, when he was honest with himself, was something closer to relief. Relief that the truth had come out before he'd said his vows. Relief that Maria had survived that hallway, and a quiet, growing gratitude for the strange way life had shown him exactly who deserved his trust and who didn't. Vanessa's case moved slowly through the courts. She eventually pleaded guilty to assault, receiving a sentence that included both jail time and a lengthy period of probation, along with mandated counseling. In her final statement to the court, she admitted that fear and desperation had driven her to a place she never believed herself capable of reaching, and she apologized directly to Maria, who chose, after long consideration, to attend the hearing. Maria didn't come for revenge. She came because she wanted to look Vanessa in the eye one final time and prove to herself, more than anyone else, that she was no longer afraid. Daniel Reyes faced his own legal consequences for extortion, closing the final chapter on a scheme that had unraveled far more lives than just Vanessa's own. As for Maria's dream of becoming a nurse, it stopped being just a dream and slowly became a plan. With her promotion, her improved finances, and Ethan's quiet encouragement, she enrolled in night classes at a local college, balancing her work at the mansion with textbooks and study sessions late into the evening. It wasn't easy. There were nights she came home exhausted, doubting whether she had it in her to finish what she'd started. But she thought about that hallway, about the moment she thought her life was ending, and she reminded herself that if she had survived that, she could survive anything, including organic chemistry. Ethan and Maria's relationship grew slowly, the way real, lasting things tend to grow, built on months of shared dinners in the kitchen after long days, quiet conversations about their pasts, their fears, the families who depended on them. Neither of them rushed it. Both of them, in their own ways, had learned the hard lesson that some of the most important things in life can't be forced. They have to be earned, brick by brick, honest conversation by honest conversation. When Ethan finally asked her, nearly a year after that terrible night in the hallway, if she would consider having dinner with him not as his employee but simply as herself, Maria said yes, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the beginning of something real instead of something built on illusion. If you were in Maria's position, do you think you could learn to trust again after everything she went through? Share your thoughts with us below. Looking back on everything that happened, both Ethan and Maria came to understand the same simple truth, even though they had arrived at it from very different places. The life you build on lies, no matter how beautiful it looks from the outside, will always eventually collapse under its own weight. But the life you build on honesty, even when honesty is frightening, even when it costs you something in the moment, is the only kind of life strong enough to actually last. Vanessa had spent years running from a truth she was too afraid to face, and in the end, that fear cost her everything she was trying so desperately to protect. Maria, meanwhile, had faced her fear head-on, at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible way, and it had ultimately led her to a life far better than the one she'd been quietly enduring before. There's a lesson in this story for all of us, whether we're the ones hiding a painful truth or the ones caught in the middle of someone else's secrets. Honesty is rarely easy. Sometimes it's terrifying. Sometimes it feels safer to bury the truth in a box at the back of a closet and hope it never sees the light of day. But truth has a way of surfacing eventually, no matter how deeply it's buried, and the people who choose courage over comfort, even when it's hard, even when it's frightening, are usually the ones who end up building something real in the end. Maria didn't set out to be brave that night in the hallway. She was simply trying to survive. But her survival, her honesty, and her quiet strength ended up saving not just her own life, but Ethan's future as well, sparing him from a marriage built on a foundation that could never have held. If this story moved you tonight, we would love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments what part of this story touched you the most, and if you believe truth always finds its way to the surface eventually, no matter how well it's hidden. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel if you want more emotional stories like this one delivered straight to you, and share this with someone you think needs to hear tonight's message. As always, thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next story.